I'm Jack Rutberg, and what an honor it is to present this exhibition of the remarkable artist Jordi Alcaraz, a Catalan artist from Spain who defies description, really. He's an artist who has remarkable historical context, and yet we experience something that is undescribable, unseen before, and yet we somehow recognize it and feel a familiarity in viewing this exhibition. To describe Jordi Alcaraz's works requires a sort of new conversation. He's dealing with process, a conceptual artist who is hugely aesthetic in his presentation of ideas. The ideas are open-ended. We are given the privilege of coming to our own conclusions, and yet there are certain notions about this work that are absolutely fixed. And those fixed ideas have to do with process. We actually experience a work being created. It opens up dimensions that we're not used to seeing. We start to question reality because typically when we look at a work of art, a framed work of art, a painting, a drawing, a sculpture, we look at it in an objective way. There is a surface, be it thickly painted, thinly drawn, sculpted in form, but the dimension, 2 or 3 dimensions, may exist, but never are different dimensions in time and space in a way that defies logic. Jordi opens up that process where the space between the viewer and the surface of the work and beyond, even to question if we are looking through the work, is created. These are illusions that open up ideas. They're evocative more than explanatory. And I think this is one of the most exciting artists to present himself in many decades. He has invented a new form of experiencing art, and that can only be shown in a limited fashion through film and photography. How does one capture liquid ideas? How does one capture transparency and infinity? In a work such as this, where Jordi captures ideas in the moment of process, are we seeing a book take form? Are letters being formed by this ink, this pigment, this paint that will soon put forth ideas, or are we actually seeing the disappearance of ideas? These are conceptual exercises that speak to our culture, our history. And Jordi calls everything into question. It's very hard to capture in film the dimensions that are here, but this pigment, in some respect, hovers slightly above the page. It's not yet fixed. And we will see in this exhibition this process where we witness this evolution or disappearance. Jordi is a visual poet, but he's also clearly a poet on many other levels. The titles of the works often give hints as to these ideas. This particular work, entitled, in translation from Catalan, "To Form 7 Letters." Now, what those letters might imply, perhaps his own name. But this is left to the viewer, and that ambiguity opens up possibilities, as will the works themselves, as we will witness. We have here a classic work entitled "Exercise in Disappearance." And so here the artist has given us this clue of which direction this is going. This book, which contained consummate knowledge, history, literature, poetry, art history perhaps. We see this appearance of a void. We see these vessels of pigment literally lifting off, and we can only imagine what might have been there. It's a beautifully evocative work that I think of the connections to Eastern calligraphy, or for that matter, abstract expressionism. We think of the works of perhaps an artist such as Motherwell, but more close to home, we think of artists such as Tapias, who built these walls and surfaces, but Jordi opens up the surface and we start to question interior and exterior. In this provocative work entitled A Book of Prayers, we really start to see how dimension, this fractured sort of dimension from the exterior to the interior. This Book of Prayers suggests a possibility of great knowledge being formed, or the fracture perhaps evokes the disappearance of those very forms. Our eyes play these difficult sort of tricks on us in the sense of finding our place, our space between the exterior and interior. This illusion is something that evokes an altered state, a meditative state, and this is the underlying element that we experience in the totality of viewing an exhibition. By the time we are finished viewing a Jordi Alcaraz, we have had a sort of Zen experience where dimensions have been layered from interior, exterior, the space between ourselves and the work and beyond. It's a remarkable effect, as we will see throughout this exhibition. And while we look at these books of Jordi Alcaraz and project our ideas, there's something else here too, where knowledge looks at us. And in this book entitled Travels to Istanbul, we see these eyes piercing through and engaging us. So we start to, again, alter our notions of how knowledge works and witnessing something in process. In this work, entitled To Fix Ideas, anyone who has ever drawn, anyone who has written a letter, an essay, a story, understands this moment of trying to land a thought in form. And we see in this work these various dimensions of these ideas trying to fix themselves on a plane. I can't think really of an artist who has actually attempted to capture such ephemeral notions as the process of thinking through a creative process. Imagine these lines, some fixed outside, some interior, some three-dimensional. They're all about to land on a page. What a remarkable concept in this work titled Book of Drawings. In this remarkable work entitled The First Book of Drawings, it's fractured, lines are floating, the dimensions are varied, and anyone who has wrestled with an idea knows this battle of trying to generate that first effort. It also plays in another level. Is it a work of archaeology? Have we actually brought a drawing back? Did we dig it up? Did we save it as these shards reveal destruction? Did we save it from that for posterity? So this is the open-ended qualities of both process of creating and process of saving. And these are the reasons why our thoughts and ideas have a hard time landing on a work by Jordi Alcaraz because he has allowed us to find our own story in these works. And while Jordi captures these ideas of books containing the wisdoms of our history, we also think about the loss of these ideas, the loss of knowledge, the approaches to new ideas in the hopes of maintaining our histories. But here, I don't know that there's a more ephemeral work by Jordi Alcaraz, and it's entitled To Touch Air. To view this work and just to meditate upon it is really quite remarkable, because all of a sudden we see this nearly hypnotic quality if we just stop and look. And in this room of works that essentially span some 8 years, the exhibition spans approximately 10 years, we see Jordi in a very minimal state, where books take on ephemeral sort of qualities. There are works here that are inspired by other books, the models of Matisse after reading a biography of Matisse, the act of reading itself, where these emanations are projecting, lifting off of the book. And that is another aspect of Jordi which is so remarkable, because I can't think of another artist who has even attempted to project this notion of the act of such endeavors. It's a remarkable thing to experience these works. And in this work entitled Different Paths to Knowledge, we see the openings, but we also see ideas pushing out. We see concave openings and convex bulges that project this notion of sharing these ideas. Now, I should say that Jordi himself really refrains from being narrative about these works. These sharings that I am offering have to do with conversations that I've had with the artist and my own projections and meditations on the work. Viewers are invited to experience their own ideas, and Jordi refuses to fix a strict narration on most of his works. While Jordi's ideas can be very abstract, he's really a figurative artist, a narrative artist in some respects. The narrations are open. But when one sees these references to this oval, they're really self-portraits. And here we see that Jordi has opened the picture plane. We can see beyond it. We see the wall behind this work. Indeed, there have been exhibitions in museums where Jordi has literally sliced open and unfurled a wall in the most eloquent manner, revealing this other dimension. And here he depicts virtually himself, self-portrait in day and night. And what can more eloquently depict night and sleep in this other dimension than this emanation, this transparency, this relief of this surface that is so liquid and transparent. To speak of transparency and things liquid, we think about the act of a still life actually being formed. Jordi speaks about liquid and surface and how ephemeral that is. You know, there's a quote where he speaks of the surface of water can be shocked, can be traversed, But the act of shocking that water and creating these waves is less significant than the impact and the aftermath of that experience. And in this work, we see this liquid form, this mirroring of an object, and this emanation in the picture plane, as though a still life is actually being captured and formed in 3 dimensions. Or perhaps it has already disappeared into another dimension. That's for the viewer to decide. We speak of Jordi in terms of transparency and invisibility and disappearance, and how eloquent to take an entire room and allow it to be absorbed, to literally disappear into this void. It really alters our ideas of what dimensions lie beyond the frame itself. The multidimensional aspects of Jordi's works include the actual frames of works. One of his concerns is how great paintings, and he's very interested in paintings of going back in history and contemporary art as well, how they're artificially contained and framed in this encasement of a frame. In Jordi's case, the frame also can act as a sense of disappearance, as we've seen Jordi allow frames to be literally absorbed and disappeared into walls. But perhaps the most extraordinary usage of these frames is when he literally, 3-dimensionally breaks the form, as we see here in this work entitled "To Catch a Drawing in Flight." Jordi breaks the surface, frames and pictures are released, and we see this throughout the body of work. In breaking the surface of the plane, here we see this paint literally projecting out of the surface, and reflection plays its part in the act of disappearance. In this work, so eloquently titled "Talking to Oneself," Jordi literally creates this emanation of the spirit of the presence of oneself in reflection. In this work from 2011, we're aware of a surface and a plane much larger than ourselves. I think of it almost as a world, a planetary experience. And the title, "Breathing," with these concave and convex elements that also, interior, there's a surface that's also open and closed. There's a remarkable sense of change and evolution in this work that suddenly takes form and informs so many other works in this exhibition. In seeing these large planetary surfaces that have been perhaps violated by an action, this work Jordi not only shows that dynamic, but breaks the frame again, where this amazing body of stones spills out onto the surface of this work, landing on the floor to create a remarkable installation. We really sense this process and interior, and the stones could literally be almost picked out of this surface of this work, when in fact it is a pure illusion. And in this extraterrestrial plane, we see those stones projecting out, suspended, leaving the surface. And in the process, the alchemy of forming drawings, lines are formed in the strange way that, frankly, any illustrator, any drawer, any draftsman understands the magic, the alchemy of what a line can do. And in this case, some force has created that very line. In that alchemy of a creation of a drawing, we see this abrasion here, the fractured lines, that something has happened to create what is titled here, strange drawing. And in this strange drawing, as it is indeed titled, we see the process of how they were really formed, as the lines themselves, again, break the surface of the work. And in this particular strange drawing, we see a sculpture where Jordi has taken this rod and literally drawn through the work. It has literally cut through this iron cylinder, this very heavy cylinder, and the magic of the process. The title indeed is The Process of Drawing a Still Life. And in the alchemy of creating a drawing, we see in this work from 2010 these pots of pigment, paint, that are ready to spill out and create these drawings. There's the line forming both interior and exterior. And in creating drawings, we see these sculptural elements whose very shadows help to create the drawing itself. And that, of course, evolves and changes with the cast of light at different times of the day. And the act here of alchemy is formed not only again by these sculptural elements, but lines waiting to be levitated in creating this drawing. ideas seem to be pulling up the drawing up to the top of this plane. Aside from the line waiting to be elevated, this drawing literally only has one drawn line, and the lines of the artist's signature itself. And finally, and in this work, we see the presence of an other. The title of the work is indeed The Other. The footprints, the sort of disappearance, and the emanations of feet that are there, or perhaps had been there, or are leaving. It's a remarkable work that combines the abstract expressionism and the ephemeral conceptual minimalism that we've come to observe in Jordi's works. So in conclusion, if there is a conclusion to be drawn here, we're witnessing the emergence, the continued emergence of a remarkable artist. We live in an era where today so many important, in quotes, artists are established by virtue of branding, of popularity, the velvet tray on which they're presented. But in times past, and very recent times past, artists were celebrated for their impact on others, for their originality and lasting consequence. And I would say that Jordi Alcaraz fits all of those criteria, that he has influenced a great many artists who don't try to emulate him, but have been so inspired by the opening up of dimensions, and it has altered their own works. I think we are witnessing the beginnings, the opportunity to be in the presence of a giant artist in our midst.
Sorry.